Salacious History discusses sex, romance, and many other topics that are intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Salacious History, the podcast that explores moments in history that were shaped by sex, romance, and people who were generally down to clown. I'm your host, Sarah Duncan. On today's episode, we examine America's first second family and second first family. Have I confused you yet? That's right, we're talking about the marriage of President John Adams and First Lady Abigail Adams. John Adams is known for his many political ventures throughout the Revolutionary War and the early years of American politics. But how did his wife influence his rise to power? That's what we'll find out today. Okay, here we go. Before we get into John and Abigail's relationship, let's do a brief overview of John Adams' political career and major accomplishments. He was a Harvard-educated lawyer before becoming a major player in the American Revolution. He was an outspoken critic of Great Britain's authority in the American colonies, and viewed the British imposition of high taxes and tariffs as an instrument of subjugation. John served as a delegate to the Continental Congress and was one of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. During much of the American Revolution, he served as an American diplomat to several European countries. From 1782 to 1783, John negotiated the terms of the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the American Revolutionary War. After returning home to the U.S., Adams was elected the first Vice President of the United States, serving in the position from 1789 to 1797. After George Washington stepped down at the end of his second presidential term, John Adams was elected the second president of the United States. He only served one term, losing the race to Thomas Jefferson in the election of 1800. The saying, "behind every great man there's a great woman," is one of the best ways to describe the relationship between John and Abigail Adams. Though John was brilliant and driven in his own right, he often looked to Abigail for counsel, political insight, and support. Many historians speculate how John Adams' political career may have differed if he had not had Abigail by his side. They have also been described as America's first power couple. John and Abigail were a couple who remained connected emotionally, intellectually, and sexually throughout their marriage, despite the fact that they spent long stretches of time apart from each other. Let's take a deeper dive into how this couple affected history. Abigail Smith was born on November 11, 1744, in Weymouth, Massachusetts. She was the second of 4 children born to Minister William Smith and Elizabeth Smith. Abigail was a devoted reader, despite the fact that she never attended school. Most girls of that era were not formally educated. Indirectly, Abigail was educated at home, where she spent her days reading the many books contained in her father's large library. The constant flow of interesting, well-educated guests through the Smiths' home helped to mold her into an intelligent, witty young woman. John Adams was born on October 30th, 1735, in Braintree, Massachusetts. The town is now known as Quincy. His father was a farmer, a Congregationalist deacon, and a town councilman. His father's side of the family were descendants of Henry Adams, a Puritan who immigrated to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1638. John's mother was a descendant of the Bolstons, a prominent family in colonial Massachusetts. John attended Harvard University, where he had earned a scholarship at the age of 16. After graduating in 1755 at the age of 20, he studied law in the office of James Putnam, who was a prominent lawyer of the period. After earning his master's degree from Harvard, John was admitted to the bar in 1758. John and Abigail were actually third cousins and had known each other since they were children. It might surprise you to learn that John and Abigail did not have the most romantic first meeting as adults. The pair ran into each other in 1759. John had accompanied his friend Richard Cranch to the Smiths' house because Richard had an interest in Abigail's older sister, Mary. At the time, Abigail was 15 and John was 24. Let's paint the picture a little bit. Abigail was barely 5 feet tall, with dark brown hair and eyes. In contrast, John was already beginning to lose his hair and was quite plump, although I should point out that being plump was not necessarily a bad thing in those days. In his diary, John describes his first visit to the Smith home as a waste of time. He didn't particularly like Abigail's father and described him as, quote, a crafty, designing man, unquote. He also wrote that the 3 young ladies were, quote, not fond, not frank, not candid, unquote. In all fairness, Abigail's parents did not approve of John at first either. Abigail's father did not consider a career as a lawyer to be very promising, and Abigail's mother Elizabeth thought John's manners were lacking. These first impressions, however, did not last. Abigail and John got to know each other over the next 3 years, as John traveled to Weymouth for business and his friend continued to court, and wed, Abigail's sister. John and Abigail were married on October 25th, 1764. Abigail was 19, and John was just 5 days short of his 29th birthday. The newlyweds settled into a small house and a farm in Braintree that John had inherited. They welcomed their first child, a daughter named Abigail, in 1765. She generally went by the nickname Nabby. Their son John Quincy was born in 1767, followed by Susanna in 1768, Charles in 1770, and Thomas Bulston in 1772. Their family experienced great heartache, first when Susanna died as a toddler, and later when Abigail delivered a stillborn daughter in 1777. While it is uncertain what illness caused Susanna's death, the loss struck both John and Abigail very deeply. John and Abigail are commonly described as intellectual equals. Even though Abigail did not have a formal education, her love of reading gave her a great wealth of knowledge to draw on. Abigail was rather more outspoken than many of her female contemporaries, but her husband admired this quality and respected her for it. In the early days of their marriage, John ran a law office that kept him very busy and caused him to spend large chunks of time away from home. While John was away, the responsibility of running the family farm and raising the children fell squarely on Abigail's shoulders. John's traveling continued to increase as he became an active member of the American Revolution and the Continental Congress. With John being away so often, Abigail generally acted without the benefit of her husband's advice. Over the years, it was usually John who reached out to his wife for advice and guidance. Although 18th century women did not normally handle business affairs, Abigail hired help, traded livestock, supervised the planting and harvesting, and oversaw construction projects. She once wrote, quote, I hope in time to have the reputation of being as good a farmist as my partner has of being a good statesman, unquote. Because of Abigail's shrewd management of the family farm, the Adamses avoided the financial ruin that struck some of the early presidents after they left office, including Thomas Jefferson. When the Revolutionary War broke out, Abigail and her children provided food and lodging to soldiers who stopped at their home both day and night. One of the reasons history knows so much about John and Abigail's relationship is the pair constantly wrote each other letters, a large portion of which is still preserved in national and museum archives. These letters date all the way back to their courtship. Due to John being away from home for months or years at a time, much of their relationship was sustained through their correspondence. It is said that the couple wrote over 1,000 letters to each other during their marriage. Of those letters written between 1762 and 1801, 1,160 survive to this day. It is these letters that give us a window into both their marriage and the cultural climate surrounding the founding of the new nation. The Adamses wrote each other constantly, sometimes penning multiple letters in one day. During the early 1770s, John would write to Abigail whenever his legal work for the circuit court would take him away from home. Many letters were exchanged between the pair when John was in Philadelphia with the Continental Congress between 1774 and 1777. As the fighting grew closer to Boston, Abigail wrote many crucial letters to John describing the events of the war as well as the mood and morale of the American public. Her letters to John during the war provide some of history's best eyewitness accounts of life on the home front during the Revolutionary War. According to notes from the National First Ladies Library, quote, "The letters reflect not only Abigail Adams's reactive advice to the political contentions and questions that John posed to her, but also her own observant reporting of New England newspapers and citizens' response to legislation and news of the American Revolution," unquote. They even kept up their correspondence when John's work as a diplomat took him overseas. Between 1778 and 1784, Abigail and John sustained their relationship through their letters until Abigail was finally able to join her husband in London. During John Adams' terms as vice president and president, they wrote many letters back and forth between Philadelphia and Braintree, Massachusetts.